Thanks, Kate. That was an amazing introduction. You managed to both compliment and burn both of us, and that's just
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, it also really sets the scene for this talk because we're going to celebrate and burn lots of things, burn all of the things. So this title references a Twilight Zone episode from the 1980s. It was called Button Button, and we really recommend it as prior viewing to this talk. Should have mentioned that.
Oh, the homework.
In the home.
Yeah.
Has anyone done the homework?
Oh, okay, all right. Well,
Anyway,
all right.
it's a really great introduction into unintended consequences. So if you get a chance, 1980s Twilight Zone episode called Button Button. It was made into a not as good feature-length film called The Box, not the 1970s Australian film with Graham Kennedy.
All right, everyone got the reading list. All right.
All right. There are consequences to decisions, is what we're saying.
And we thought that it would be fair to give a little bit of a content warning about the topics upon we might touch. We might talk about what we're going to talk about war. We might talk about war, death, communism, poison, online abuse, cards as weapons, 20th century American hip-hop, and how sometimes you should not do what your customers want. We intend to do this in a sensitive and inclusive way. Speaking of inclusion, I would like to echo Kate's words earlier that we are on Gadigal land and that sovereignty of that land has never been ceded. Did that click?
Is your garage door open or not working?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's good.
Okay, so Kate pointed out that we usually don't dress alike. So just in case you can't tell the two of us apart, that one's Tom. He's a principal consultant and he organises Thoughtworks social justice practices. He's a director of Digital Rights Watch, and you might occasionally hear him in the media getting really shouty about our government's human rights abuses with online work. He also rides a bicycle and drinks tea made in a teapot, but never does those things at the same time.
Thank you. Josh is awesome and hilarious, so no pressure. He is a lead designer at Thoughtworks, and he came to design through the regular traditional route of molecular biology. Journalism, broadcasting, and screenwriting. So he has some very firm views on not only CSS, web standards, but also which TV shows are worth watching. We both love 90s hip-hop. So if you're struggling to tell us apart in this context, consider me the Chuck D of the partnership and Josh the Flavor Flav.
I'm Lampin, I'm cold Lampin.
But we're not here to talk about ourselves. You'll be glad to know that bit is over.
At last.
We're going to talk about this guy.
He looks nice.
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
This is one of the world's most successful product designers. He started as a tinkerer, which is what we used to call hackers, back in the day, and he became a mechanical engineer. His product has sold in the hundreds of millions around the world. There is one for every 65 people on Earth. It is a defining icon of the 20th century. There are dozens of songs about it. It is even on a country's national flag. By any yardstick, these are hallmarks of a fantastically successful piece of product design. This man is Mikhail Kalashnikov, and in 1947, he invented the Automat Kalashnikov Model 47 rifle.
So, for those who aren't familiar with rifles, that turns out to be the favoured weapon of armed terrorists the world over. Number one. People love it. They really love it. It's easy to use. It's relatively lightweight. It was the first of its kind to be able to switch from automatic to semi-automatic just in the middle of using it. And the late 20th century philosopher Ice Cube actually once famously said that a good day was one on which he didn't have to use his AK. Kalashnikov struggled, particularly in his later years, with the effects of his creation and the deaths that it had wrought. He was a patriotic man, and he wasn't a cynical profiteer. His weapon was designed to protect his glorious Soviet Union. He had no patience on it. And sure, the fatherland looked after him well. He lived a very comfortable life, but he wasn't in it to be a billionaire. He built this weapon with the intention that it would be used by the Soviets for Soviet victory. And it did that. So he was very proud of his creation. But he was also mortified at how it was used elsewhere, because he created something without thinking about its ongoing use. He didn't think that if it was successful, his home country would then sell that to other governments. Supplies of the AK-47 went to different parts of the world. They were supplied to governments and armed forces in different parts of the world, which also means that those shipments were intercepted by drug cartels in South America and pirates off the coast of Africa. It wasn't any longer restricted to his homeland. It then became a symbol of freedom for some and a symbol of terrorism for others. And none of this had anything to do with the Soviet Union's triumph over the West, which, as we all know, happened.
It's very triumphant.
Yes.
And so near the time of his death, Kalashnikov became a religious man. And he wrote to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church to ask, like, what is his responsibility? Like, he contributed to the deaths of strangers and had nothing to do with Mother Russia. He was really conflicted at how his invention that he wanted to be a patriotic tool for the Soviet Union had become an item of terror. But just in case you are worried that we are a couple of red book-toting Maoists, let's look at another example from the other side of the Iron Curtain.
It's the Colt M16. So this rifle was designed to counteract the AK-47 that had ripped so many GIs Joe apart in the Korean War. So during its development, Colt first created the AR-15 rifle, which testing showed, and we all need to do user tests, it wasn't quite lethal enough. So they tweaked it a little bit and made the M16, which was lighter and could use really great ammunition that could pierce a helmet.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
That's
that's
lovely.
good. Yeah, well done. So the M16 became terrorism's second favourite weapon. You might like to think of it as the Megadeth to the AK's Metallica. Also a fun aside, Tom, the AR-15 is the rifle of choice for US gun shooters in schools.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, so you know that like when kids are buying your product, you're really on a winner.
The millennials love it.
And like we could take this all the way back to the Winchester repeating rifle. And do you want to go on a history of guns? No?
No.
Okay, we won't do that.
No.
I mean, we could, but we won't.
No.
But are guns bad? Or is it just the ability for people who aren't directly involved in sovereign warfare to get guns and use them on other people what is really bad?
It's the guns, Josh. It's the guns. Guns are bad. They're bad.
But isn't it also more than the guns? Because, like, remember on the Curiosity Show? Who remembers the Curiosity Show? Great. So remember on the Curiosity Show when they used to tell you that if you were going to use a craft knife, you had to get parental supervision. It's like product engineering needs that too. We need some kind of supervision.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, right? Like having supervision, but capitalism, right? Like laissez-faire global capitalism depends on an almost total absence of informed, reasonable adult supervision.
And yet some of my best clothes were made by capitalism.
Yeah, and some of all of our clothes were made by children. So, which we could talk about now, but it's been a long day, right? So instead, maybe we should talk about something nicer. Is that
Yeah,
all right? Yeah. Okay. All right.
I had great breakfast this morning.
Great. Let's talk about something delicious.
Great.
Let's talk about food. Food is different to guns. There's a thing you can take away that is a useful fact. Food is inherently a good thing. Like, we all need it. Some of us love it. Some of us a bit more than others. And food is one of the worst things that we have done to each other through our practice of industry. The unintended consequences of the way we produce food have, in karmic irony, completely undone our own sustainability.
And that's without even thinking about the baby milk industry, which, to my understanding, is babies linked up to tubes having their sustenance sucked out of them so it can then be wiped on the faces of rich people.
That is exactly what the baby milk industry is, Josh. This is exactly how it is. So let's talk about water, a slightly less controversial product than baby milk.
You think?
Well, so in Flint, a town in Michigan, Global Food Corporation Nestle, with this brand, they bottle water. They bottle 150 gallons of water a minute.
That's a lot of water.
That is more water than we have up here, right? Like, this is not 150 gallons. This is not even 1 gallon. And for that bottling of 150 gallons a minute, they pay the town of Flint $200 American per year. Interestingly, that sum is about the same as a household in Flint pays for their annual water supply. But the water supply in Flint is poisoned with lead. So residents can't use their municipal water. They have to get bottled water instead. A bottle of water costs about $1.50. You might get through a packet of 60 in a day. The bottle in the bottle of water will never biodegrade. But enough about these cheerful stories of great product design. Should we talk about software?
Who likes software? Yeah, that's a few people.
All right.
That's more people than remember the Curiosity Show. So you need a license to own a gun, but you don't need a license to write software. Anyone could write software, like literally anyone. You could do it. It costs $99 to sign up and be an Apple developer, and that allows you to get apps onto people's iPhones. The only thing that governs your ability to get apps onto strangers' iPhones is Apple's ever-changing App Store policy. So whereas doctors, lawyers, proper engineers, build a bridge and get over it. And if you're proper engineers, you could. They need qualifications and regular retraining. People who work on software don't. So those professions have their ethics frameworks, and we don't. They have honed their best practices of their professions over years, and we have not. But let's not beat ourselves up over that, right? Because if we put it into perspective, those professions are, some of them, centuries old. And our industry is more like the motor industry was in the 1970s, which is why the software you build never breaks out just outside of Wodonga with steam coming out of the front part.
That's where the engine is.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh! What about in a V-dub?
It doesn't matter which state you're in.
Okay.
So maybe we need a code of ethics for we need a code of ethics for software development. It's not a maybe. We need a code of ethics for software development. Where should we get it from, right? Like, do we have professional associations or unions getting involved in here? Well, maybe a bit. That would be nice. But what would we put into this? And maybe we can talk about this over some drinks later, because I think it's a really interesting question for our industry. Do we want to go way back to the medical profession and kind of look at Hippocrates and say, well, firstly, do no harm, because we do harm sometimes, and maybe we should not. Can we get inspiration from fiction? Should we be talking to reading some Asimov and getting into the laws of robotics, and the idea that robots cannot, through their actions, allow humans to come to harm. Like, that's a really interesting question to pose, like particularly when we're doing so much work in AI and machine learning and decision-making systems like Centrelink. Do we need some kind of ethical certification? Like, how do you know if the software you're using has been made by a free-range developer?
Oh, you get a testers. You get a tester, and then a tester links that in, I think.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we can put that into our build pipeline.
Yeah, please.
Okay, all right. But there are movements like the 996 movement in China, which is a movement of software developers drawing attention to the fact that many of them are working between 9 in the morning and 9 at night, 6 days a week, which is quite a long time for a person to be working.
Unless you're a consultant.
In which case, it's totally fine. So yeah, a code of ethics for software, that would be really lovely. We could do with one.
All right, so here are some horrible software products, and we've all seen these headlines over the last few years. Facebook currently is effectively a sovereign state, and Zuckerberg actually, Facebook has its own currency now. That's how close it is to being a country that doesn't have land. It's weird. And Zuckerberg always puts it on the government to create regulations to enforce the way that they act. But then when governments actually put those regulations in place, Facebook tries to find ways to circumvent those regulations, get around them. So that's not working. And in fact, remember a couple of slides ago when I said that for $99 and at the whim of Apple, you could actually get your things onto strangers' iPhones, but you had to go through Apple's App Store process? Well, Facebook found a way around that, and they managed to get their apps onto 13-year-old strangers' iPhones and collect the data from that. So not even that's working for us. We need more than just government supervision, and we need more than just super government supervision like the GDPR, which is working great for getting people confused about what they can and can't do with privacy, and what we've just all assumed is do nothing but still collect everything, but be careful with it.
I mean, to be fair, the GDPR is a very big, complicated document.
It is a very big document. I've not read all of it.
I don't think anyone has
read all
of it.
No.
I'm not even sure it allows you to read all of it.
Well, it does, but then it asks for it back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That is a top GDPR joke, by the way. So this kind of regulation protects our freedoms from. We have freedom from surveillance, freedom from harassment, freedom from exploitation, that sort of thing. Facebook effectively being a sovereign state means that we need more systems of accountability. We need two systems to create accountability at least. We can't just rely on Facebook to do the right thing, in the same way that we can't just rely on governments to do the right thing. We've trusted them both, and they've failed us both time and time again. So at a minimum, we need two systems to work on these other systems. We need journalism and professional associations to hold us to account. And we actually need to embrace the constraints that they put on us and our work. We need to understand why those constraints exist, and when we try to push those boundaries, we need to know that we're pushing them with the bias towards our features being built and not towards the governance that they're trying to control. We have to understand that that's a negotiation that we enter into when we start trying to push the boundaries. It's not to say don't push the boundaries, understand why they exist. Our industry needs these things to retain a social license to operate. But what can you do about it? We need a new hope. And this is where you come in. So this quote is now 11 years old. I'm just going to give you some time to have a quick read of it. It's shorter than the GDPR.
funnier too.
It is funnier. Right, so Atwood goes on to write, if you don't assume the worst, you'll end up with institutionalized spam, pain, and suffering because the initial designers did not ask themselves, what if some of our users are evil? This is a really important point because not everyone is a good person. Nobody thinks that they are evil. There are fuckwits everywhere, possibly even in this room, possibly on this stage right now. I'm watching you. So, to defeat idiots misusing our systems, we need to understand them and put in our countermeasures. So, know thyself, know thy enemy, art of war, blah, blah, blah. YouTube's CEO, YouTube's one of my favorite topics at the moment. YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, I think I said that right, Wojcicki, said in an interview about hate speech on her platform, quote, if you look at the content on the internet, you look at rap songs, late night talks, a lot of humour, you can find a lot of racial slurs or sexist comments. If we were to take down every video, now I might have put some of that emphasis on, but I imagine that's what it sounded like. Essentially what she's saying there is that her business model relies on people making videos that cause controversy because those are the ones that get attention, and the ones that get attention are the ones that get the ad dollars. So let's pretend that those insulting videos are the same as parody or art, and then we can just allow it all. So the famous peddler of philosophy for the intellectually dishonest, Edward de Bono, had 6 different hats which represented different lenses through which we could see a problem. Why he didn't choose 6 different coloured glasses, I mean, we'll never know because who's going to bother to ask him.
Maybe he had shares in a milliner's shop.
Oh, maybe he did. All that mercury poisoning. So he had those hats, and you could view problems through different ways, and maybe we need more than just 6 hats. Maybe we need new metaphorical hats. Maybe we need an apathy hat, or a drunk hat, and maybe an abusive hat, or a bitter hat.
Oh, yeah. What about the Russians interfering with the elections hat?
It's
a big hat.
Yeah.
Or we could have the racist, sexist, kind of otherwise bigoted hat.
That's a much smaller hat, but everyone thinks it's bigger.
The sociopathic hat. The doing it for the lulz hat.
Yeah,
I gotta love the lulz.
But okay, so Tom, we have all these new hats. On what kind of occasion would one wear this sort of hat?
So we've come to the part of the presentation where we might say something actually useful.
I skipped quote.
Well, that's true. So I would like to introduce you to Rachel, and I'd like to introduce you to Dot Everyone. Dot Everyone is an ethical think tank based in London. It was founded by Martha Lane Fox with all of her ill-gotten gains selling us hotels on a pink website, and it's run by Rachel Caldercutt. Their job is to champion responsible tech for a fairer future, and they're a not-for-profit who does this. And they're great. They have a product called Tech Transformed, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and that's a toolkit to help technologists build responsibly. And in that toolkit, they have this great practice called consequence scanning, in which you scan for consequences of the things that you are building. And so one of the things that you might want to ask yourself is, like, well, when do we do that? Like, I mean, we should think about the consequences of our actions occasionally. When? And, we're all agilists now. I don't think anyone's allowed to do software development unless they're berated into agiling. which means that we should do everything continuously, or at least frequently. So this model here kind of tells us, like, when should we think about the consequences of our product decisions? Like, we should do it at vision time, right? Like when people like Josh are coming in and we're working out, like, what are we even building and who are we building it for? And what's it going to do? And what's it going to do that we don't want it to, but it's going to do it anyway?
Do I have a stack of post-it notes for you?
Oh yeah, so many post-it notes. We should do it during the roadmap. Like, are we building the security last? Like, maybe we should start encrypting things before it becomes an issue. And we should be doing it during the course of development, because part of the reason to do an agile is that we learn things as we go and we refine our understanding of the world and of the product we're building. So we will learn how our users, some of whom are idiots, are using our software and using it to do things we either don't want them to or did not expect them to. So we need to be able to steer ourselves throughout the project. And here's a bit about what it looks like. So it's a way of working out what the team can do, what's inside our purview, what's outside it. Josh and I are not as good consultants as Keith, so we don't have a 2x2 matrix. This is a kind of radar format. The columns represent consequences that could be intentional, our users buy stuff, or maybe unintentional, our users buy a whole load of crap that they don't need. And the distance from the center represents our agency. So some consequences will be directly relevant to decisions that the team are making, and we can influence those, and we can take actions to prevent them. Some will be independent to us completely, the bigger state of the world, and all we can really do is keep an eye on the situation and steer when those things happen. And many will fall between the two, so we can steer those consequences by influencing those people who do have agency over them. So you can imagine something like this with an absolute ton of post-it notes on it, being a bit like a retrospective, and turning those into actions that we can use to steer the project away from unintended consequences that we do not want. Here's another model. This is for helping understand where your product may have some issues. And it's from Ethical OS. They're really good people. They self-describe as how not to regret the things that you will build. They're sponsored by Pierre Omidyar, who's late of eBay. He now runs the Intercept and Purpose. And if he had thought about, addiction and the dopamine economy, maybe people would not have bought so many secondhand Beanie Babies in the 1990s. But this model shows 8 ways in which you might build a terrible product. You might build a terrible product for one of these reasons, or all 8 of them, right? The idea is to use this model to ask questions of the product vision, to interrogate it, and to steer the execution to avoid those risks.
So this is like a how-to?
I mean, it could be. Like you could decide you wanted to have plenty of data control and monetization, but
sounds good.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it could be how not to.
How not to?
How not to, I think, would be stronger.
How not to, guys?
It's not the evil handbook, right? This is the do not do this stuff.
That's why it's got sharp edges on it.
Yeah, it looks much more dangerous.
Yeah.
And slightly chainsawy.
All right, got it.
So you can ask yourself, like, how much are your features tickling around these areas, right? Should you be putting something into your raids? You can ask a project manager for help with the scissors if you need to put something into your raids.
Oh, does everybody understand what raids are when we talk about raids?
Okay. Risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. So product and project management stuff that you need to work out throughout the delivery of the project. Here's another model that we have gratuitously plagiarized.
Oh, no,
We've got an attribution.
Oh,
great.
Yeah,
okay, good.
All
right, good. It's legit. This is the Schwarz model of human values. This is, believe it or not, every single human value. Every single human being has all of these values inside us, right? These are things that we can all believe. But what happens is that depending on our context and the things that we're doing and the things that we're hearing and seeing, different values become activated at different times. You might, for instance, be scared into thinking that Australia is being attacked by boats.
They're not just boats, they're boat people. They're boats that have merged with people.
Oh my, like horrible hybrids with legs and steam, and
They
Yeah.
walk and float, Tom.
So this is how terrifying this can be, right? So one of the questions that we can ask ourselves during our project inception is, like, what values do we have in our product? Like, what's it trying to do? How are we living through those values? Are those values that we're trying to espouse and to live and to show in our product, are they contradictory, or do they complement each other? One of the great things about this map is that the placements are not random. Those things are clustered together. So if you are trying to work on values that are close together, they will be congruent and you'll have a harmonious product design. But if they're opposites, you'll find there are inherent contradictions in what you're trying to build, and you'll need to manage that. We can ask ourselves, what does success like? Like, what does it mean to have self-discipline in our product? Like, what does that actually look like? What does it feel like to a user? Can we track these? They shouldn't change too much throughout the project. So how can we revisit them through the project as we go? Those things that we believe, that we can make sure we are sticking to our core principles on. I think this is fascinating. Monash Uni are doing some great work in this area, and I advise you to go and kind of dig that out and keep going.
And actually, while you're talking about,
sorry, press the
that's,
button.
I know, because I interrupted. It's my fault.
Okay. No, it's I pressed the.
Yeah, but like we can go back as well. I pointed at that, but I don't think it's there.
No.
It's somewhere in the cloud. What we haven't mentioned, what's really important about this picture is when you're building a product, pick 5 things that you believe in. And this is a great cheat sheet for working out what you believe in. I think it's a great start. Now the cloud.
Are you back in the groove now?
Back in the groove.
Okay, all right, we're on. It's going.
So we all recognize this equation, right? Yeah. I heard someone say Bergstroms Law. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It's Bergstroms Law. And just in case there's anyone here who's not familiar with it, Bergstroms Law can be used to calculate the actual value of a network. So you might also be familiar with Metcalfe's law, that's much more famous. That shows you the effect of a network, and it was originally created for telecommunications networks. Now, whether or not you understand the maths, clearly I do, it's easy to understand that these laws show how the more successful something is, the further away you are as a creator from being able to control it and to control how people use it. Bergstrom's law shows that there's actually a limit to how big a network can be for it to be valuable. At some point, so many members get added to a network that those members have, like new members, have 0 value. They are actually detracting from the general value of the whole network.
Hey, that's like when I joined a project team.
They said nice things about you. And so that's really important, because if you look at Facebook now, actually, according to Bergstrom's law, they have exceeded this limit of the value of their network. And every new person who joins Facebook is reducing their value. So they have to look at new ways to try to create value out of their existing network. They're always trying to do this churn. So all of this is to say that if you create software that is really, really successful, people you have never even imagined, like you've never imagined that these people could exist, they are going to try to do things using the thing that you have created in ways that you could never have foreseen. They're going to try to integrate it into processes that you don't like. Other people you have never met are going to try to control that. When it comes to software, success and failure are not binary. In the same way that in that last slide.
Actually, when it comes to software, everything is binary. Sorry.
What about quantum computing?
Oh.
Yeah! Futurism for the win. Success and failure aren't even a spectrum. They're more like a Mobius strip. it is a continuum, and at every point you are touching both the success and the failure. You're touching both the good and the evil. What's happening in Facebook and YouTube right now, it's neither purely good or purely evil. There's some good things and some bad things. Facebook is doing this great thing where if you send a message to your wall, if it's still called a wall, saying that you want to raise money for a charity or encouraging other people to raise money for a charity, Facebook will actually start a process that helps you raise money for that charity. And through your Facebook wall, they will collect on your behalf money for that charity. That's a good thing. It seems like a great thing on the surface of it. But then they're also collecting a whole new set of data that they never had before, which is how they're trying to game Bergstroms Law. Enough about software, though. Well, enough about software that we didn't create. We seem to have a lot of engineers in the room. Yeah, I'm recognizing you as engineers now. But what does it mean to be a good engineer?
So let's talk about Rolls-Royce.
Oh yeah, let's.
Yeah, because as an English, there aren't a lot of times you can say quality English engineering and keep it. Yeah, exactly. That's the face that naturally comes out, right? So let's talk about Rolls-Royce, right? And famously, they make cars, and they're very nice ones, especially from the 20s. They also make jet engines, and if you were one of the people who flew here on an aeroplane, maybe you were driven by one of these things. Now, I'd like to kind of tell a short story about how in the 1970s, there were some engineers at the Rolls-Royce workshop in East Kilbride. East Kilbride is in Scotland, and when you think of Scotland, you might think of glens and babbling brooks and whiskey and distilleries and countryside. East Kilbride is the other sort of Scotland. And it's full of factories, and they received some jet engines in the Rolls-Royce factory for repair. And the engineers learned that those engines had come from some Hawker Hunter jets, and that those jets were being used by Augusto Pinochet in a coup against Salvador Allende, the democratically elected president of Chile. Now, Pinochet was an evil despot, right? So, of course, he was supported by the British and American governments, and he disappeared over 3,000 people and tortured 32,000, right?
When you say disappeared, you don't mean like a magician?
I mean, like a bad magician. Like, they don't come back again.
Okay.
Yeah, unless we're halfway through.
Okay.
I think it was just all bad.
It was all bad?
All bad. I mean,
okay.
Like, general rule of thumb with Pinochet, it was all bad.
Right.
Okay. So, this is not good, right? This is really horrible kind of military junta fascistic stuff. And so in solidarity with the people of Chile, the workers in the Rolls-Royce workshop blacked the engines. They marked them with a ticket that says, "Do not work on this." And then they left them out in the yard to be collected. The truck drivers refused to pick them up, so they stayed in the yard. Now, if you've been to Scotland, you'll know that it has two seasons, winter and July. I stole that from Billy Connolly. I feel like we should do correct action.
Yeah,
it's a good one. Though.
Fine.
So these engines sat out in the yard, just rotted. They became completely useless. There was no way they could be used for anything ever again. And that happened within a year. And then in 1990, the military junta in Chile fell. Now, you might be wondering, why are we telling you this story? And it's not really about Rolls-Royce. It's about these guys. These are those engineers, right? They had love for people 12,000 kilometers away. They had strength of heart to back that with their actions, and they had the determination to see that through. These men are heroes. They're not wearing capes, but they are heroes. And in their autumn years, they can look back with pride on what they did and living a life that really mattered. And you can do that, right? Kalashnikov was a great engineer, but he was just a cog in the Soviet machine. He had no control over how his product was used, where it was being sold, where and by whom. You, in this room, have so much more power. In this room, we are the people who are building the businesses, markets, and society of tomorrow. Our skills are so much in demand. In this room, we have got tech superpowers. And we can use those powers for good, right? And importantly, we have got the power to say no. We can say no to building features that invade our users' privacy or put their information at risk. We can say no to working for the defense industry.
Unless you believe in the defense industry.
Right, like if you really believe that a nation needs a strong military, do it.
Then do it, but really believe in it. I don't.
No, I don't either, but
I
people
believe
do.
you could just do it with music.
So you can say no to systems that discriminate against Indigenous Australians, people of colour, the poor, or those with a non-binary gender identity. You can say no to building systems that help heavy polluters and usurers. You can say no to these things.
You work in software. You're in demand. We all are. We have specialist skills, and this privilege should not be exploited. It needs to be used judiciously. If you're going to refuse to work on something, make your reasons clear. Listen to other people's arguments. Know what it is that you stand for and who stands with you. Know who stands against you and why they have that point of view. Speak regularly about the morality of the things that you are making and the possible evil that can be wrought from it. So sometimes it doesn't have to be big issues or big clients, and sometimes we have to expect that other people are going to do the work that we won't. So, for example, I used to work for a web development company who had a client. Their name was the Vinyl Solution, and they were a record store. I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and I thought the idea of naming a store after a pun that was based on the genocide of my people was abhorrent. I said to my boss that I would not work for that client. And they were fine with that. And my colleagues were fine with that. It meant they had to take on that workload, but I was able to stand by my principles. Another example is last year I was working for an airline, and with that airline we were working on their check-in and boarding pass features. And I tried to get into their drop-down menu for titles, MX, MX, and non-gender specific honorific. Say that 10 times fast.
And no, I'm not.
No, don't, because we're running out of time. Now, I didn't succeed then, because it turns out that some airlines take that list of honorifics, which includes titles like Baroness and Duke, from an organisation called the IATA, which is an international airline transit authority, and they define what those drop-down titles are. But it was a start, because now I know that we can petition the IATA to get MX added to that drop-down list. It's little things that we do that make the things that we do important. We don't have to deal with antiquated reasons that happened long time ago, colonialism, for example.
Yeah, I apologise for my people.
Please do.
So talent and business investment in talent gives us leverage.
Think about the consequences of your product decisions. Think about them early. Don't assume good intent from all actors. Mike Montero came up with the term dick-proofing. So when you get your own product, try and break it as much as you can. Be the worst person you could possibly imagine and try to make that thing horrible for humanity. And if you succeed, fix the product, don't release it. Think about damage limitation and putting in kill switches. Get input from vulnerable users and potential victims of your product. And don't think of these people as edge cases. They're not edge cases. If you design a product for the extremes, the middle will work itself out.
And similarly, maybe don't have a homogeneous team. Like, that will help think out around the issues. Like, this talk would have been a lot better if we were more different, basically.
Yeah.
Soz.
You could have not worn a jacket.
Oh, could I?
Yeah.
Oh man, I wish you'd told me that.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't work for the defense industry or other such terrible organizations. Don't get hung up on the one metric that matters. There's a lot of talk about that, and people obsess on, the bottom line or NPS. What happens when you do that is you ignore the richness of the experiences that are going on around the products that you're building. And please, use your tech superpowers for good and say no to bad ideas. Thank you.